How long have you been in the Kentucky Senate?
Well, I actually took the seat in 1989. I intended to serve one term, but here I am.
But why did you just intend to serve one term, and how did that happen? It sounded like it wasn't something that you planned.
Well, I didn't plan it. When the one before me, which was Georgia Davis Powers, decided to retire.
Another Hall of Famer.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. She decided to retire, and members of the community leadership came together because they were concerned about who was going to take her place. So at the time, I was doing quite well in my profession as an attorney and wasn't really interested in that sort of thing. I was supportive of other people who were running for things, but eventually they persuaded me to at least come and interview, and I did. And before I got down the hall, someone came down and said, "You're it." So they threw their support behind me.
Who is the they?
Well, geez, I can't remember. It was like...
was it an informal coalition? I mean, it was
the Wolf Reporters of the world. I believe Lyman Johnson was in it. It was an array of individuals that you would expect that were prominent and active back in those days. But their whole idea was, we're going to throw all our support behind who we, collectively decide. And that's how I got in it. And I said at the time, well, I'm going to go one term. That's all I can do. And boy, I fooled myself.
And what was it that prompted you to stay? What was about the task of legislation that prompted you to stay? Was there some particular case or legislation that you wanted to see through? How did that?
I think it's more fundamental than that. It's sort of the way I was raised, You start something, you complete it. So that being the type of thing that I'm used to doing, and the fact that this stuff never ends, I sort of stepped into the trap myself, I guess. And it was consistent with what I do and have done historically throughout my life in terms of community engagement. It was just another level, another form, another tool, if you will, to do something that was worthwhile. And it became more and more interesting. And then additionally, my background was in political science all the way from college all the way through working on a doctorate at Michigan. It was always political science, and it's all political, and I always saw it that way anyway, so it sort of fell into place.
How many African-American senators are there from Kentucky?
Well, now there are two at the same time. Historically, there are three. The first being Georgia Davis Powers. We all know her great work, and she's still with us. And the beauty of it all is that there's three, and we're all here on earth. And there are two that are sitting currently this last term out of the Lexington area. An individual was elected to the Senate. So that's an interesting development as well.
So do you feel allies with the other African-American senator, or are there issues? He's from Lexington area, you're from here, that you might have different interests at different times and may not be?
Well, what I enjoy about the new senator, who's African-American, is that he brings another level of energy and a perspective, as you've indicated, from Lexington. And of course, we have common interests, particularly as it relates to our natural constituency base of African-Americans. But we also look at the broader issues because we both understand that the broader issues are the issues that affect everybody in their everyday lives and that everybody's concerned about. So yes, we have some commonality and interests that specifically address issues that African Americans are concerned about. But in the broader sense, we also have commonality in the broader framework of issues that affect all the citizens of Kentucky in this instance.
Now, you've been in the legislature a while, but what was it like when you first went there? Because we know that in Kentucky there's this whole rural versus city kind of thing. Tell us about those early days in the legislature, and here you're walking in there, and the only African-American at that time coming in. What was that like, and interacting with these rural senators?
Well, keep in mind that Georgia Davis Powers is there, so she sort of set a standard, and she was well respected. So I had a little platform to operate out of, and people used to say, well, those are some big shoes to fill. And I said, I don't wear those kind of shoes. So I think I'll just carve out my own little piece. And, but she was quite helpful. But I guess I could deal with it this way. When I was elected and I was in Frankfurt and I wanted to see where I was going to be and I was figuring out where I was going to sit and all this sort of thing, I moseyed into the Senate chamber one day, and the Senate chambers roped off and nobody was there, of course, and I went and found my seat and I sat down and I looked around and sort of took it all in, you know. It was kind of historic, and I began to get the feeling of that. And someone, I guess, in fact, it was an individual that was, I guess, I'll call it the keeper because I can't remember who the gentleman was at the time, came into the Senate chamber and said, I'm sorry, sir, you can't sit in that seat. And I sort of chuckled to myself and I said, oh, yes, I can. And he said, no, you can't. The Senate chambers are closed. And I said, that's okay. It's all right that it's closed. And he was irritated, I could tell, and I wasn't moving, and I was being pleasant, but it was sort of fun in a sense. So eventually I left on my own, and we got into our first days as a Senate, and the guy recognized me, and my goodness, he couldn't apologize enough. And I think to the time that he was out of the picture, he was apologizing to me every time I saw him. But I understood that particular situation. But the fact of the matter is that when I was there, and as I am now, at least initially, it was always a battle to try to not get pigeonholed into the black guy with the black issues. And I was always trying to say, well, wait a minute, I'm dealing with education, I'm dealing with appropriation matters, I'm dealing with things that affect children across the Commonwealth. I mean, why does the press, you talk about this urban-rural thing, why does the press and everybody else put me in this little pigeonhole? And I fought that for about 2 years. I was very, I wasn't irritated by it, but I recognized it, and I recognized the broader constituency. So finally, I began to deal with people frontally about it, you know. And at that particular time, some of them picked up on it, and some of them didn't. Some interviews I wouldn't grant because I would always ask the nature of it, and some I would because it was tactically important to address. And it took the second term for me to understand, the heck with that. I'm going to represent these interests. I don't care how they turn that. I'm going to do what I have to do, and I have to navigate this terrain in order to be effective. So instead of being reactive to it, I began to embrace it, and I began to deal with those issues and those broader issues. And I have to remind the press, I even today have to remind the press that comes to me every time there's an issue that looks like it's something that affects black folks, do you have, I'll ask them, is there something you want to ask me about the budget? Is there something you want to ask me about, you know, the gifted students in our educational system? Do we want to talk about poverty as it affects our, you know, sometimes you have to do that, but 50% of the time they run right back in there and they put that curve on it. It's an amazing thing. I think it's clearly a product of our society and the way we view things, and the press, I think, is reflective of that as well.